children are dead after the Annunciation Catholic School shooting in Minnesota. The state with some of the strongest gun laws proved to be the weakest of all. Laws without enforcement are just words today on The 10th Man. On August 27, 2025, Minneapolis joined the short, tragic list of cities where primary school children have been massacred. At Annunciation Catholic School, during a morning mass, a shooter opened fire from outside the church windows into the pews filled with students. 2 children were killed, 18 wounded. The shooter ended the attack by killing himself. This wasn't in Texas or Florida or some state the media loves to point at from a distance. It happened in Minnesota. The very week Democrats were all gathered in Minneapolis for their national meeting. And while they were patting themselves on the back, children were bleeding in the pews just across town. And here's the bitter irony. That state's governor likes to brag about having the strongest gun laws. We'll come back to that. Immediately after Annunciation, defenders of the trans movement shouted, "Trans people aren't the problem. There are hundreds of school shootings every year, and only a couple involve trans people." Well, that line is everywhere. Social media threads, op-eds, even mainstream reporting. But here's the question, where do they get their figures, this hundreds of mass shootings every year? The answer is a website called Everytown for Gun Safety. It's the group that Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire, owns and funds. And they're the group that writes half of the talking points that you'll hear on outlets like CNN. Now, Everytown used to call their data set a database of school shootings, quote unquote. But after people like us exposed it, after our videos racked up millions of views and made people laugh at the absurdity, they quietly renamed it. And now it's more accurately called Gunfire on School Grounds. Well, somewhat more accurately. And if you want to see for yourself, we'll put the link in the description. Because, be warned, it's not that easy to find. They've kind of buried the page. And you can't just click and download their CSV file either like you used to. You've got to apply for access and get permission. So they've locked it down. Why? Because if you could open it up, you'd see how ridiculous the entries are. Michael Bloomberg paid for this. He wanted propaganda, so he got propaganda. Plain and simple. Here's what you find in Everytown, what they call school shootings. A principal committing suicide in his office. A school resource officer, that's the policeman as security, shooting a vandal in a parking lot. Construction workers installing carpet, one shooting the other, which is workplace violence. A drug deal gone bad and shots fired on a sidewalk on Saturday night, out in front of the school. A gang fight in the parking lot at a Friday night football game. Some really absurd ones, a dead body found at a school that had been abandoned, even for years. And my own favorite, hunters shooting at a deer on school property over the weekend. All of those count as school shootings. So these are the hundreds of school shootings that the media wave in your face. So when they say trans shooters are rare, well, sure, if you lump suicides, gang fights, and deer hunters into the same bucket. But that's not truth. That's deliberate deception. So what actually counts? How many real attacks on primary schools during school hours targeting children have happened in America in the last 2 years? 2. Just 2. Now that's too many, but it's not hundreds and hundreds. Covenant School, Nashville, Tennessee, March 27th, 2023. And Annunciation Catholic School, Minneapolis, August 27th, 2025. Both shooters transgender. Now that's not the clutter. And it's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. All the school shootings in the United States attacking primary school students, 100% were by transgender perpetrators. Now I say in America because don't let anyone tell you that this only happens in America. Sadly, it doesn't. And ironically, the best source for actual global primary school attacks is Wikipedia, forbidden by teachers to use and mocked by all of us, but it's actually Wikipedia, not Bloomberg, not Everytown, not some ivory tower academic database, but Wikipedia. Because they're the only ones honest enough, perhaps because it's crowdsourced and subject to correction, to just list the cases. And what does Wikipedia show? Since Covenant in 2023, there have been 9 attacks on primary schools outside of the U.S. Belgrade, Serbia, a mass shooting. Blumenau, Brazil, at a daycare, hatchet killings. Berlin, Germany, an elementary school stabbing. Lukavik, Bosnia, a teacher shot. That one didn't involve the students, but we have one that does. Lianjiang, China, 6 killed and 1 wounded. Dublin, Ireland, 3 children and a teacher stabbed. Guishi, China, 2 killed and 10 injured. Zagreb, Croatia, 1 child fatally stabbed and 6 others wounded. And there's Finland. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're leaving out one that wasn't technically a public school, but the dance school in London, 3 girls killed May of last year. And then Finland, not 1 but 2 attacks. So one was at Virtola, a shooting in last year, but in primary schools. The last primary school attack before Annunciation was in Finland. So here's the kicker about Finland, that Governor Tim Walz bragged in the October debates last year, the vice presidential debates, about Minnesota's gun laws. And then said about the United States, we have school shootings, and saying Finland doesn't have the problem. But they did. The last school shooting anywhere had been in Finland in April. How does he get away with that? How come the news media, no one corrects him? They can say anything about the United States, no matter how outlandish, or any other country, and get away with it. And we're sad that Finland had that. But now, again, the last primary school attack before the one at Annunciation also was in Finland. Pretty close tie to Tim Walz, but no one's calling it out. So no, violence is not uniquely American, and also guns are not the only weapon. Violence, unfortunately, is human. The weapon changes, but the horror and the motivations and the perversion do not. So back to America. What do the last 2 primary school shooters have in common? Well, they weren't kids. So this wasn't a high school. They weren't bullied students attacking their peers. They were adults. They stalked little children. They were suicidal, and that's key, because trans and suicidal go together, and they were trans. So here's the first problem, and why we have to look at our political leadership. Under existing law, people with serious mental illness are already disqualified from buying firearms. That's why Form 4473 of the ATF, the form everyone has to fill out that leads to a background check before buying a firearm, asks directly about mental health. And until very recently, gender dysphoria counted. The DSM of the psychiatrists use listed it as a mental disorder. The World Health Organization listed it as a mental disorder. It was considered a disorder. Then politics stepped in. The classification changed. Biology didn't change. Suicide rates didn't change. Nothing about the danger changed except the politics. So let me ask you, they said it was a disorder, now they say it isn't. Were they right then, or are they right now? And what are the ramifications? Because if the old standard was correct, the Annunciation shooter was already disqualified once. But that wasn't the only red flag. There's another disqualifier, and this one is not about shifting definitions. It's black and white right there on the form today. Every gun buyer in America fills out the same federal form, Form 4473, and question 21F says, are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any other controlled substance? And right underneath in bold print it spells it out. The use or possession of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law, regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medicinal or recreational purposes in the state where you reside. In August 2023, 2 years prior, Minnesota legalized recreational marijuana. Governor Tim Walz bragged and proudly signed it into law. He held it up as progress. But legalization didn't change federal law. It only created a conflict. And once you legalize pot at the state level, more people openly use it. More dispensaries, more users, more employees. And under federal law, every single one of them is automatically ineligible to purchase a firearm. And the Annunciation shooter wasn't just a casual smoker. He was a heavy user. He worked in a marijuana dispensary. Everybody around him knew it, and that alone should have barred him from ever touching a gun. Oh, and it's not just the law, it's the science. For years, decades, psychiatrists have warned about the connection between heavy marijuana use in the young and onset of schizophrenia, paranoia, even violence. And let me be clear. I'm not necessarily talking about the retiree who takes CBD oil for arthritis, or the middle-aged user who takes the edge off once in a while. And those aren't the people planning school shootings. But here's the hard truth. The law doesn't make that distinction. The form doesn't ask if you're a heavy user or a casual user. It doesn't ask if you're 19 years old working in a pot shop or 70 years old using CBD to sleep better. It just says marijuana is illegal under federal law and marijuana users are disqualified from buying guns, period. And if Democrats want to lecture the rest of us that the law is the law, then it ought to be enforced here most of all. And yet when the story hit the news, what did we hear? The guns were legally purchased. They love that phrase. It's in every headline, every chyron, every op-ed, because it makes you think we need still more laws. But the truth is simple. These guns were not legally purchased. Not under federal law, not under the plain text of Form 4473. A heavy marijuana user lied 3 times on a federal form. And that's not legal. That's a felony. So when the media tell you the guns were legally purchased, what they really mean is the laws we already have weren't enforced. So here's where it all lands. Governor Tim Walz brags about strong gun laws. He brags about background checks and about red flag laws. He brags about legalizing pot. And he did a compare and contrast with us in Finland. But under his watch in his own state, A suicidal trans shooter who worked in a pot shop, disqualified twice over by existing law, bought 3 guns, lied on the forms, and murdered children. Hunter Biden lied on the same form. He never killed anyone. He got prosecuted. In Minnesota, under Walz, a shooter lied 3 times, bought guns, and murdered children, and Walz has nothing to say suddenly. Here's a bigger problem. When a governor signs a bill into law, it's not just a photo op. It's a grave responsibility. Walz signed recreational marijuana into law in August 2023. What did he think would happen? Marijuana use went up predictably. And under federal law, gun purchase applications from marijuana users should have gone down, or rejections should have gone up. That's logic and math. That's what a functioning system would produce. So, what did Walz do to make sure Minnesota's numbers reflected that reality? What safeguards did he put in place? What enforcement followed the legalization? The answer is obvious: nothing. Absolutely nothing. And let's just put this in perspective. Remember Rick Snyder, the Republican governor of Michigan? He was prosecuted over the Flint water crisis. His connection was indirect. He was the governor, not the mayor, not the city council. And no one died. Now compare that with Tim Walz. In Minnesota, under his watch, under the bills he signed into law, 2 children are dead after Annunciation. Dead because marijuana was legalized, gun applications weren't checked, and federal disqualifiers weren't enforced. That's a direct line of responsibility. And yet Walz has faced nothing. No charges, no impeachment, no accountability at all. So I'll ask the obvious question: why was Snyder hauled into court for indirect involvement in Flint where no one died, while Walz walks free after a school massacre that leads straight back to his own decisions? And here's an aside worth noting. You would think Democrat governors would leap at the chance to enforce this rule. Federal law already says if you smoke pot, you can't buy a gun. That's millions of people automatically disqualified. And let's be honest, pot smokers aren't exactly the group the gun lobby fights hardest for. So this would be low-hanging fruit. If they were serious, Walz, like every other governor who legalizes marijuana, why do they ignore it? Well, this tells you everything. Their laws aren't about safety. And they do care about the marijuana lobby. Because they're about politics. Not fewer illegal guns, but fewer legal guns in the hands of citizens who actually follow the rules. And this is the lesson. It isn't just about Tim Walz. It's the pattern. Democrats brag about passing the strongest gun laws in the country. They take victory laps. They use Bloomberg's rankings like trophies. He's got a scoreboard. Minnesota ranks 14th amongst all the states. And they build careers on saying, we've done more than anyone else to pass gun laws, not to make you safer. Because then they refuse to enforce the laws that already exist. They legalize pot while knowing federal law makes pot users ineligible to own guns. They pass background checks but never check the backgrounds that matter. They let shooters lie on the forms and then just demand more forms. And it's not just Minnesota. Every state that legalizes marijuana has the same problem. Federal law hasn't changed. Pot is still illegal under federal statute, which means every pot smoker in Colorado, California, Michigan, Illinois, New York, and now Minnesota is automatically disqualified from buying a gun. And that's not my interpretation. That's what the form says in black and white. And every governor who legalized marijuana without putting enforcement behind that form is guaranteeing more illegal gun purchases. They're doing what Walz did, celebrating new laws while ignoring the ones already on the books. Then when people die, they point fingers, they wave Everytown's fake database, and they demand still more restrictions on the rights of people who follow the law. That's not protection, that's negligence. Negligence that costs lives. Gun control didn't stop Covenant. Gun control didn't stop Annunciation. Gun control doesn't save lives, it always costs lives. And as we'll keep showing, the very people who brag the loudest about strong gun laws are the ones under whom those laws fail the most. This has been The 10th Man, where one voice against 9 is often the only voice telling you the truth.